do you get over the colds? I don't know how many people know folks who will get a cold and then it stays with them for months and months and months, and it passes from everyone in the family, goes back to work and so forth. And that's a bit of what we'll talk about today too. I'll lead into that at some point. So the talk is the Angry Nutritional Educator. You guys can see how angry I am. So instead of me getting angry, the beat will get angry for me during the talk. I probably should have called this talk to get more attention, how not to die early. That probably would have got a lot more people coming. Since we have a nice group like this, I don't like to just make it just a lecture. So if you have questions, if you're here for a specific topic and I'm not talking about that topic and I'm far away from it, make sure to stop me, ask your question, because there's a very good chance someone else here has that, and I don't want anyone to leave without any of their questions answered or any of their concerns. And it doesn't have to just be with you. It could be anybody that you know as well. Okay, so the first thing I'll start out with is the purpose. So I'm the owner of the Whole Health Nutrition Center. We've been in the Medical Arts Building in Endicott for 5 years now. And this is our purpose. This is why Whole Health Nutrition Center exists. So it's to improve the quality of life for as many people as possible through education and better nutrition. So when it comes to your health, if you have good health or poor health, where's your quality of life? When you think about where a person is and what they have to deal with on a daily basis, how much is that health dragging down their quality of life? So when I first started, I thought it was about getting people healthy. Really, it's about improving a person's quality of life. So when you think of yourself or think of people that you know, think about what their health issues are doing to them and how it's affecting their quality of life. Because if you look at it as a quality of life standpoint, you're much more likely to want to do something about it so that you can dig yourself out of that hole or out of that ditch. Now, does anyone have a specific question or topic that they want to make sure that I definitely talk about? Or I get to talk about anything that I want? Okay, good, good. All right, so let's see how that works. So the thing when I talk with clients, and I want to, in terms of going through the talk today, is that when you want to improve your health in a permanent way, you have to have a permanent dietary change. And when I talk about diet, it's not the 2-month, 3-month, 1-year type of diet. It's not the South Beach diet. It's not a particular diet. When you're looking at improving your health, you have to look at how what you're going to eat. You're going to change the way you eat for the rest of your life. So it's a lifestyle change. And you have to ingrain certain things in your habits. You have to learn how to properly shop, which surprisingly, when you change your diet, shopping can become a real issue. You have to learn how to properly prepare your foods and plan ahead. You have to know which foods might match up with your current symptoms and your current state of health. So when clients come to me, my goal is to get them to understand how the body works. So that's part of the education process. How the body works, what the organs and tissues are doing inside the body, and also how that relates to their health issues, and also the types of foods that they want to choose to eat. Because when I find that people are educated about what they do and what they eat and why their symptoms are there, they're much more likely to want to maintain that way of eating for the rest of the life, because you actually know how to take control of when you're not feeling well. When a certain symptom gets worse, you know what to do to correct it. So the one thing in terms of everyone here, and for me too, is I'm not a nutritionist. And you might say, well, what in the world are you doing standing here then talking about nutrition? Well, I want everyone here also not to think of food as being a nutritionist in terms of your, from your point of view. I want everyone here to think of themselves as a nutritional educator. So my goal when clients come in is I want them to know what they're supposed to do so they can go home and tell their spouse what they could do to improve their health. They can tell their friends, their family members what they could do to improve their health. So when you're all here thinking about how to improve your health and the things we talk about today, think about yourself also being educators to those around you. There's no way I can get in touch with everybody. I wish there was, but I can't talk to everybody one-on-one. So with my clients and with folks who come to my talks, by proxy, have you guys talk to those who you think could use the information here today. So think of yourselves as nutritional educators. So don't think of yourself as an ist. And that's why I said I'm not a nutritionist, because a nutritionist is a follower of a very distinctive practice system or philosophy. And so what I mean by that is that there's really, and some people may argue with me on this point, is that there's really no one diet to rule them all. So everyone's heard, well, if you eat like a vegetarian, you're going to be healthy. If you eat vegan, you're going to be healthy. If you only do paleo, you're going to be healthy. Some people might say the ketogenic diet is a way to constant success. So why I put them all here and why I said don't be an ist is that you have to be able to understand what each diet does for you and where you might be at a certain point in your health picture. You might not be able to be a good vegetarian at a certain point, even though you really want to be a vegetarian, because your diet or your digestive system won't allow you to handle it. I have clients who might come in and they really want to be on the paleo diet, but their body cannot digest the meat. So we have to actually soften things up and do something where I would call like a mix between the Mediterranean and the vegetarian diet. Some clients come in and they feel that the Homer Simpson diet is the way to go. This one's the hardest for me to try to convince, because a lot of people like their donuts, particularly if you're in the South and you have Krispy Kreme donuts. See, look at that. That's the biggest reaction so far is Krispy Kreme donuts. But that's the kind of things when we talk about that those sugary foods will elicit, because you think, oh, they're tasty. Your brain starts thinking of, actually starts releasing all sorts of feel-good hormones like dopamine. That's why it can be so hard to resist those foods. So if you know why you're eating your foods and what your organs and tissues do in your health picture, you actually don't have to use just willpower to stay away from those foods. So is everyone familiar with these diets? Has anyone never heard of any of these up here? Has everyone heard of the ketogenic diet? That's mostly just eating, it's almost like this, just eating meat. Maybe a little bit of vegetables. You try to stay under 20 to 40 grams of carbohydrates, so your body produces ketones instead of using glucose. It's a very good way to lose weight. But what I found in my practice is some people just cannot handle that way of eating. So we have to come in with bone broth and vegetables, and in this way, like I said, mix the vegetarian and the Mediterranean diet. If that person was forced to be on a paleo diet, they could really wind up not doing well, being very sluggish, bloated, because they just can't digest the meat products. So that's the important thing, too, to understand, is that each organ, tissue, gland, and cell has its own nutritional bank account. So your diet also has to take into account where you are. I call it the disease scale. Are you feeling really good? Are you having dysfunctional types of symptoms, which this is where most people fall into. And a lot of people in this state have digestive issues, so you might not be able, for example, to eat raw vegetables. Raw vegetables are usually said this is very healthy because you don't lose any nutrients. But I have clients who have to cook their vegetables and eat them in a soup or stew, because if they have raw vegetables, their digestive system is just going to implode on them, and they're going to actually have a lot of additional symptoms. And if you're down here in the red, you might have to actually, I didn't put it up there, but I call it the go back to infant type of diet, where all your food is mush, so you don't have to do any digestive work. You only eat pre-digested foods. So you have to consider where you are in your health, what your body is feeling like, how the current way of eating is working for you, so you don't try to cram that round peg into the square hole type of thing, even though, because you hear a lot of certain things, according to those who talk about diets, that this diet must be good for everybody, and then you try to do it and you think there's something wrong with you because you're not doing well on it. It might not actually be anything with you, it's how your body works, and you have to shift and try a different way. When you eat, I tell clients you have to eat for your nutritional bank account. So when you're choosing your foods, think of your cells, your organs, your tissues. They all have their own little separate bank account, and they combine together for one big bank account, which is your health. But each organ, tissue, and cell has its own different bank account, and so they can be depleted at certain rates. And then each person has their own biological differences. So you can see where a diet for one person, a certain way of eating, might not match up well for another person. So the key thing, though, is you want to eat, I'm going to come back to this, in a way that actually supports rebuilding your bank account. So this is the one thing that almost everybody in this country can't stop doing. And I have talked about this for 10 years, and I don't see any changes. And that's one reason the last talk I did was on diabetes. And I saw how rampant diabetes is going to be by 2050, and I'll show you a little scale. So that tells me that people are not doing this. People are eating more processed food, despite all the places like CoreLife. What I do, back in the 50s, Jack LaLanne, has anyone Remember Jacqueline talking about no sugar, no this, no that? Well, we're still doing that, and he talked all about that all the time. So, whoops. Oh no, what did I do?
Yep, touch it. You should, no, yep, that.
Oh, okay. I just went too fast.
Nope.
Can I go backwards? There we go. Okay. So the reason I brought this slide up now is that when you eat, this is the way it works. You have nutritional deficiencies, which are developed by, for the most part, by the way you eat. And then you have all your different nutritional bank accounts. So some people will develop nutritional deficiencies at a different rate than others. That's why you have your person who everyone probably knows that seems to be able to eat everything, and they just keep trucking right along. Well, most of the times, those folks will begin to peter out and have health issues in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And some people know others who try to eat very, very well, and yet they have continual health issues. So nutritional deficiencies can actually be built up at different rates in different people despite eating a really good diet. Nutritional deficiencies create organ dysfunction in the body, and I'm going to show you some pictures of organs. And what I want everyone today is to see what's happening inside their body, because if you know what's happening to the organs and tissues inside your body, you might be more likely to avoid the foods you should and eat the foods that you should. So as you develop organ dysfunction, you develop what I call poor health. And this is generally the person that knows they don't feel well. A lot of times their blood work comes back normal because you don't have a specific disease at that point in time. But you feel like the dimmer switch is being turned down. You might have some additional aches and pains. You might feel your energy slowing down. And a lot of people attribute this to, well, I'm just getting older, so that's the way it has to be. And I tell my clients that's a lot of nonsense. As you get older, you should be expecting excellent health for as long as possible. But the problem is, the longer someone remains in poor health, the more likely they are to start gravitating towards actual diseases. So someone who has constant joint pain might actually eventually develop osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis if they don't change the way they're eating. Someone who has issues with sugar cravings and falling asleep in the afternoon and weight gain and things like that, and they're watching their blood sugar slowly go up, but they're not doing anything about it, might wake up one day after going to the doctor and guess what? You're diabetic. Now you have a disease. So one of my goals is to get to clients, or to get to as many people as possible before you're diagnosed with a disease. Or if you're what I call in that mysterious gray area where you've done all these different tests, the blood work comes back normal, yet you're not feeling good, but no one has any particular answers. That's because the organs are not quite in a disease state, but they're also not functional. So the blood work isn't really going to show anything at that point.
Question.
Go ahead.
So do you think it is also across the board that there are certain foods that actually give people more energy? Like, as you say, like it's certain foods that affect people like disease-wise. Is it the same with energy?
It depends on the person. Some people will feel super energetic on a very light meal with with vegetables and a little bit of meat, and that keeps them going. Some people, if they eat some raw cheese, they're they just don't have the oomph, or they actually might break out in rashes, even though raw cheese is supposed to be really healthy. But there's something else going on inside their body that's preventing that good food actually being a healthy food for that person. And a lot of time, in terms of weight, some people will eat really well. They'll exercise till they're blue in the face. They'll do everything and anything. They'll start cutting calories, and they just can't lose weight. A lot of times, certain foods that a person eats, even though they're considered healthy, can prevent someone from losing weight. I've had a couple of clients, for example, who were eating dairy, raw dairy, and everything. We thought their diet was good, but they couldn't lose weight. We took the raw dairy out of their diet, and then their weight started coming down. So even seemingly healthy foods could be a problem if you're having, for example, trouble losing weight. So that's why I tell folks hormones in the body are much more powerful than any kind of diet and any kind of exercise program. You want those in place, but if that's not working, you have to start looking at what are your organs and tissues doing inside the body and make adjustments. That's why I said that list of diets can be very fluid, and you can kind of mix and match them. Does that make sense? Okay. Stop me if I'm not making any sense. All right, so let's go back this way. All right, so this is food, right? This is food. What's that?
So-called.
So-called food. Right, this is what I call so-called food, but how many people do you know would say this is food? And that's why that earlier picture, stop eating processed food, people aren't getting it because they think this is food. Well, it fills you up, it allows you to have some energy, and you get to the next day, you're not hungry. But these are the things that are breaking down people's bodies on a daily basis. And they're also, as you can tell, a lot of these are marketed towards kids. So people are growing up thinking that this is food. For example, when I started working on my health, the first time I went to the farmer's market, this was my picture of food. So I walked away from the farmer's market because nothing was in a box. So I figure if I can change my mindset, just about anyone else can. It took me 3 trips or 4 trips to the farmer's market before I actually bought something. So this is real food. Unprocessed vegetables, lightly cooked. One thing too, when I talk to people about vegetables, you don't want to stick them in their microwave and zap them to death. A lot of people will think, well, that's a good way to make them mushy. We've essentially have ruined all the nutrition in that vegetable. So the best way to probably, I think, for you to start thinking about how to approach eating is look at your plate and ask yourself, do you have a real protein, which can be animal or plant? In the beginning, I try to stress to clients, don't worry so much about organic. Just start getting the sugar out while you're trying to make some changes. We'll get to the organic part later, because sometimes you can overwhelm yourself with trying to do everything at once, and then a person will give up. And what happens? They then revert back to their old eating habits, and then the symptoms come back or they don't improve their health. That's why when we talk about changing your diet, it has to be sustainable for the rest of your life. How many people, and I've done it too, well, you may know of people who started off with all great intentions, and at some point in time, the old eating habits came right back or snuck back in, and then you're right back where you started. And generally that happens to most people, and that's exactly what the so-called diet market plans on. They plan on failure in the future. So you keep coming back and you keep trying new things and you keep spending more money. But what if you just stayed with one thing and were consistent and let it work, making some minor tweaks along the way? You would spend a lot less money and actually feel a lot better. So look at your plate. Do you have a protein, animal or plant? Fats. There are some examples. Don't be afraid of fat. Fat is actually very healthy if it's a unrefined fat, healthy fat, not a highly processed fat. And I'll have some pictures about that in a second. And also vegetables, and I have lots and lots of them. So if you look at your plate and you say, do I have a protein, a fat, and a vegetable? You notice there's no room for, do I have my sugar, my ice cream? Do I have my donut? Do I have my soda? Do I have my processed grains? Do I have my boxed? If you just ask those 3 things, you'll eliminate all those other things very, very quickly. And this is as basic as you can get. And most of the diets that I showed you will actually fall into these categories. So you don't have to do anything much more radical than this. And it's very doable because there's all the vegetables for most people will be open to you. You'll have lots of different fats, avocado, coconut, sesame seed, butter. Believe it or not, lard is healthy. How many people would have thought lard is healthy? No, not too many people.
I just learned that, actually.
Lard is one of the healthiest things. It was made to be called unhealthy because they had to sell their Crisco. And if you're going to sell a product, you have to make the competitor look bad. But when there was very little heart disease, people were eating butter, eggs, heavy cream, and lard. Lard is actually is more unsaturated than saturated. Coconut oil actually is much more saturated than lard. So it gives you a perspective of lard is not nearly as bad as you may have thought. It's actually quite healthy. And you can make some really good sweet potato fries and really good omelets with lard. And then, does anyone have any questions about that?
So if you are eating this way, does it still matter what time of day you're eating? Meaning, like, if you tend to eat a later meal?
Well, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, like, if you're eating this way.
Not so much, because one morning you can have, for example, mostly like a light salad with some tuna. Later in the day, you might want something a little bit heavy. Some people can only eat very light breakfast. But generally what I find that works best is you have your best meal first. The next meal is a little bit lighter, and then the evening meal is the lightest because you're going to bed. But it's reversed in this country. The heavy meal is last. People have trouble sleeping. They can't go to sleep because they're agitated or they're too heavy or they're just trying to digest the food. So it affects sleeping to a great degree. A lot of sleeping issues can be handled by just eating a much lighter dinner with no sugar. So I think some people may have heard of course now I can't think of her name. She was in the 60s and 70s, one of the first women to really be preeminent in nutrition. And she would say, eat like a king at breakfast and a pauper at dinner. And if you can reverse that, or do that, or reverse the traditional way of eating and do that, you'll actually find you can digest your foods a lot better. And what you do is you create what I call a really good fire first thing in the morning. How many people know of, or maybe you do it yourself, where you don't eat till 11 or 12, and you just go, 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 go? Well, what's happened is you've given your body nothing to work with, so there's no fire. So now it's going to be running on fumes. And generally what happens is the cravings start to skyrocket as the day goes on, so you start eating whatever's available. And then you start catching yourself in a vicious cycle because now you're going to want more later because you're going to crash because of the processed foods and sugars you ate. And frequently, clients will say, well, I do really good through lunch, but then I can't stop eating whatever's in front of me at dinner. When I look at their meals, they're not eating much at breakfast, so they're not keeping their blood sugar in good shape. So it's not like you have to have this huge meal in the morning, but you got to have something. And that stabilizes your blood sugar, which stabilizes your energy and your eating habits. So come lunch and dinner, you're much more likely to eat the right foods and not raid the kitchen cabinet.
But what if you're hungry in the morning? Like
So
that's a problem
for some folks. So one of the things I found is also when people do that, they've trained their stomachs not to accept food in the morning. And it may have started when they were kids. So really, you just start with bone broth, something very simple. If you're vegetarian, then you would start with just maybe a very light smoothie. It's just something to get in and start telling your stomach, hey, expect some food in the morning. It might take 3 or 4 or 5 months to do some retraining, but then you'll find, oh, I'm actually hungry in the morning. You may never be a big breakfast person, but what you don't want to do is just force yourself to eat. So it could be a very light salad with a little nuts and seeds, or some bone broth, or a light smoothie, a real smoothie, not full of just a juice smoothie. That's not a good option in the morning. So you could retrain yourself to actually eat in the morning and then be in good shape for the rest of the day.
Along the line of veggies,
Oh.
I keep hearing different things around which vegetables should be cooked versus which ones should.
Which one should be?
And it's challenging because, like spinach, as an example,
Yeah.
everybody serves spinach salad. Yet I've read articles that says, right?
So you want to know which vegetables should be cooked and what's the benefit? Okay.
Because I think they recommend spinach be cooked,
Mm-hmm.
not eaten raw. Like kale. Kale's not supposed to be eaten raw either.
Well, that's a good question. So understanding, as you said, why and which vegetables should be cooked and which ones can be eaten raw. So essentially, when I start out with clients, unless they have a very specific issue, I don't really want them to worry about that. I just want them to start eating vegetables and getting the sugar out. And then later on, we'll get to that. Now, generally speaking, if your kidneys are in great shape, then, for example, spinach is high in oxalates. So cooking the spinach would reduce the amount of oxalates in there. So that would be a benefit to someone who might have a family history of kidney issues or themselves have a history of kidney issues. You probably wouldn't want to sit down and eat bags and bags of spinach over months and months and years, because even if you're healthy, you might actually create a situation where you start building up kidney stones. Other foods like kale, broccoli, people are told to cook those because they will slow the thyroid down with what's called goitrogens. Generally speaking, if your thyroid's in great shape, you really don't have to worry about that. But if you have a history in the family of hypothyroidism, or you have hypothyroidism yourself, or Hashimoto's, which is an inflammatory and autoimmune issue, you would actually want to make sure that you do cook your kale and your broccoli and your those really call them the brassica family. You would want to cook those. So if there's really no specific issue going on with your kidneys or your thyroid, you could probably eat those foods nonstop without having to cook them. Does that answer your question? So I thought I'd throw this up here to give you an idea of why I began to get really frustrated and why I started thinking, well, boy, not only that, but people should start getting angry about their health and about the health around others who are not doing anything. Because this was diabetes in 1994. The gray is a very small percent, and light blue is, again, a very small percent, somewhere between 6.5 and 7.8% of the population. But fast forward 20 years, and this is what you have. This is diabetes 2 years ago. Only one gray state, Colorado, the healthiest state, I guess, in the country. But look at that, super dark blue. You've got 15% of the population in some of these southern states and midwestern states that are diabetic. And you've got a lot of the rest of the country between 7 and 8%. Now, if this was a communicable disease, we would probably all be in lockdown wearing masks, and there would be 24/7 news spin on what to do about this. But because this is a very slow-moving disease that is attributed to eating habits and can take decades for symptoms to show up, it's not thought of as nearly as big of a deal. Now, the problem is, because of that mindset, and even those who are diagnosed as pre-diabetic and even diabetic usually don't take it seriously to begin with, is that you can see by 2050, in 2001, they thought that there would be 29 million people with diabetes, and this is what they thought in 2001. In 2015, there's already 30 million people. So they're off by 35 years. So that gives you an idea that that diabetes is increasing at almost an exponential rate. So by 2050, the new numbers are, instead of 29 million people, there'll be 1 in 3. So you walk around, 1 in 3 people will be diagnosed as diabetic. And that's why earlier I said level of frustration came out, because we're losing the health battle in this country. And the numbers show that despite all the good food available to us, we won't stop eating processed foods. And so that'll be over 100 million people with diabetes that know they have diabetes. So there'll be others who don't know it, who won't fall into that number, and there'll be a number of pre-diabetics too. Now, that begs the question, diabetes has all sorts of secondary health issues. So blindness, amputation, kidney failure are some of the most prevalent ones. And so all the secondary health issues are going to be there as well. So when I talk to everyone here and the people that you see on a daily basis, if they're eating the food that generates this kind of health picture, it's something for everyone here to take seriously, and for you to actually maybe rock the boat for those around you and see if they're going to be at least somewhat open to what you're saying. One of the questions I find that works very well is, do you think your health will be the same, better, or worse in the future? And if the answer is worse, ask them if that's acceptable. If the answer is, doesn't really matter, well, you can't do too much. But if you ask them and force them to think about what their health will be like in the future, and they come and say it's not acceptable, then the next thing is, okay, what do you plan on doing about it? So what I thought is I show some pictures, so you know what's actually going inside in the body. So this is visceral fat. Does everyone know what visceral fat is? This is the fat that's not in between the layers of the skin. This is the fat that's inside the body, surrounding the organs in the body cavity. It's supposed to be there, but this is what happens with diabetes for the most part. Although you couldn't be diabetic and be completely thin and not even exhibit any sign of weight gain. But this is where most people are headed in this country. This is very dangerous. Can you imagine the stress on the organs and tissues? I mean, everything is squished in. Think of 10 people trying to squeeze through that door. Nobody's going to feel very comfortable. Think of the pressure on the arteries and on the heart. This is also like one big ball of inflammation. So it will help create inflammation throughout the body just by being there. So anyone who has any kind of inflammation and they're gaining weight, that midsection is actually transmitting or creating inflammation inside the body in addition to anything else that's going on inside the body. This is actually the most dangerous fat in the body. All right, so this is has everyone seen, this is a healthy liver? That's a fatty liver, and that's a cirrhotic liver. So when you start building that fat in the midsection, you get also a fatty liver. And the liver will look just like an alcoholic's liver, but it's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So because a person will eat a lot of sugar, particularly fructose, and what's in sodas, high fructose corn syrup, what's added to a lot of foods, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, that's processed by the liver. And the liver will become overwhelmed and actually start putting fat on top of itself because it has nowhere else to put it. And one of the best ways to know if you're doing well is to look at your triglycerides. If they're going up, 120 is okay, but if they start breaking 150, you can rest assured that you're starting to build fat not only in the body cavity, but also right there on the liver. And a fatty liver is definitely not going to work well. So asthma, allergies, skin issues, immune issues, hormonal issues. A lot of women have thyroid issues. Well, if you clean up the liver, you might actually have a good thyroid. You might actually not have hot flashes and night sweats. You might actually not have hormonal issues, since the liver is much involved in the degradation and removal of hormones. And if it can't do that properly, all these old hormones start building up in the body, and you can have lots of issues regarding that. This is a fatty heart. It's a good one. You see what's going on. You got a extra big heart here. So it's good to have not literally to have a big heart.
Yeah.
So it's good to have it figuratively, because that means the heart had to grow and get bigger because it was all big and flabby. And in order for it to actually push the blood through your body, it just had to get bigger and bigger to compensate for the fact that it was flabby. This fat right here, you see all the yellow on the heart? So not only does the fat develop in the midsection on the liver, but it will sit on the heart. And this is not from eating fat. This is not from eating saturated fat. This is from eating too much sugar, too many processed grains. The body will turn that into fat inside the body because it has nothing, can't do anything else with it because you're overloading it. And it will start depositing it wherever it can. Once it runs out of its prime spaces, it puts it on the liver and the heart and anywhere else it can do it. So the best way to avoid that is actually, you can eat butter, real cheese, coconut oil, avocados, all those things that have fat that you generally, particularly women, have been told to stay away with or away from. Again, this is what your arteries look like when they're not doing so well. So these are people who tend to eat processed food. This is not because you have necessarily high cholesterol. What happens is the damage is done to the arteries. Cholesterol is a nutrient, which is anti-inflammatory. It goes here to patch everything up. And so it's like blaming the fireman for being at the fire. But the real damage was done earlier because of all the sugar running through the body. The best example I heard was Dr. Oz said, think of sugar, high sugar in your blood being like little shards of glass. And they just keep picking away, and eventually you have enough damage that something has to be done. And eventually you might start developing plaques and blockages in the artery. And it's not because of saturated fat. I put this here because that's one of the biggest things. If you stop worrying about cholesterol and saturated fat, cholesterol in your food has no impact on your levels of cholesterol. That was put out 2 or 3 years ago by one of the governmental agencies that I guess advises the government on what to do with health. And they went through all the literature and they said flat out that cholesterol has not been found to do anything negative from food sources in the body. So you can have your eggs, have your good cheese, have your coconut oil, have your grass-fed red meat, have your chicken, have your turkey. It's actually a very healthy substance. It's a nutrient, and it will help heal inside the body. That's why when people have a lot of inflammation, cholesterol goes up because the body's trying to ramp up the cholesterol in the body to help handle the inflammation, so arthritis and things like that. So this is what I wanted to show earlier. This is when people down here were eating the foods that we're being told to stay away from. these in the 40s and 50s when people started eating the corn oil, the Wesson, the Crisco, fast food was becoming more prevalent. So the good healthy foods that were on the farm, that food looked like food, deaths due to heart disease were almost non-existent. But as we started eating the processed foods and the foods that we were told that were better than the old style food, deaths due to heart disease have become rampant. And women, because you've been told to eat low fat, no fat, you now are beating men in this category, which is not a category you want to beat us in. Go ahead.
Before we leave the heart,
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure if you're using unhealthy and damaged the same. And so it's unclear to me, like, so if the heart's damaged,
Mm-hmm.
is it irreversible? And that any change you make will just keep it where it's at?
That's a good question, and actually I have some pictures which,
That's fine.
yeah, and if I don't hit it in the pictures, let me know, but that's a good, very good question. I put this here just because I want everyone to know that the word saturated has been, just because the name saturated gives saturated fats a bad name because you think it's going to clog the arteries, it's going to saturate everything. The word saturated is only there because of the chemical structure of that type of fat. It has nothing to do with the saturation of your arteries and tissues. It's just an unfortunate name for a healthy type of fat when it's unprocessed. One thing, if you want to know how well you're doing, essentially, I say, you see number 4, I say ignore your cholesterol unless you have a disease, hypercholesteremia. But generally, initially ignore that number. It's getting pushed lower and lower, and many people actually feel worse when they go under 200 or have a low number. In fact, I'll have clients come in and they're at 2.5, and doctors want to immediately put them on a statin, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But for you to be the one who's the expert on your blood work is you take your triglycerides, and I've had these colored in black, so these are the 2 most important. Triglycerides are actually a better indicator of heart health than any other number in your blood work. You divide that by your HDL, and that will let you know how healthy your LDL is, which is sometimes you're told that's the bad cholesterol. There's nothing inherently bad about it. It's the quality of it. So, for example, if you take, let me see if I have this here. Yep. So if you take your triglycerides and divide by HDL, if your number is 2 or less, you have what I call big fluffy LDL, which is the quality. So you're worried about quality, not so much quantity. And the big fluffy LDL just bounces around and goes where it's supposed to go and delivers what it's supposed to deliver to the heart, into the arteries, into the cells of the body. But as it becomes greater than 2, the LDL starts to shrink, and it becomes, I call, like a racquetball. And imagine that floating around your arteries. That's going to dig into the tissue and start causing damage to the arteries. And if you have additional sugar, high levels of sugar, you have racquetballs hitting your arteries. You have the sugar, like shards of glass, hitting your arteries. You're well on your way to heart disease or having some sort of plaque develop and then break off later in the future. So this is what you want. The lower cardiovascular risk is with large, fluffy LDL, and the higher cardiovascular risk or cardiovascular heart disease is with the small, dense LDL. So you can become an expert on your blood work and just do triglycerides divided by HDL and see what you come up with. A lot of people have high triglycerides over the 150s and low HDL, so they're going to get numbers in the 3s and 4s and 5s. That means you're at higher risk, very high risk of having health issues in the future. Now then, at that point, then you can take a look at your cholesterol on the other numbers. But you have to know this first, and you can't just look at cholesterol as in a vacuum. Does that make sense? Has everyone heard this before? About the particle size? This is new? Yeah, so I always recommend get your blood work, save it like you do your taxes, track your numbers, do the math. Triglycerides divided by HDL. This way you'll know where you're going. Because if the numbers are normal, you'll be told everything's good. But if you track your own numbers, you might notice a trend. And you go, ooh, I'm still normal, but the trend over the last 4 visits to the doctor is going in the wrong direction. And this will prevent you from falling into a disease state or even a dysfunctional state. And it'll be a lot easier to fix it than once you get that note from the doctor saying, guess what, you're pre-diabetic. I'm going to skip over that. So this is going now to your question. So I have some pictures of healthy organs and diseased organs. And there's a range in between healthy and disease. And generally that's a big area that I call gray area that's called dysfunctional. So once the healthy kidney starts to deteriorate, that's when damage starts to happen to that organ. So it can still be functioning pretty well, but it's starting to become damaged. And eventually enough damage will happen to that organ, in this case the kidney, that it will become diseased. And at that point, it's very, very hard to fix it. It's much easier in that big gray area before it actually, you're told you have stage 2 kidney failure or stage 3 kidney failure. It's not impossible. I've seen some interesting things change, but they have to work really hard and they had to be really perfect with their diet. So when people tell me it's too hard to change their diet, I say, well, right now you're the one in control, but later on you might be forced to do the necessary things. And if you think it's going to be hard now, 20 years from now, you won't have any wiggle room. You'll have to be perfect. These are these kidneys down here are diabetic kidneys. So that's what happens to diabetics as time goes on, particularly if it's uncontrolled. Think of the health of that person. Probably not doing too good.
You're showing the difference between diseased kidney
Mm-hmm.
and a
Healthy kidney
the one to the right though
is a diseased diabetic kidney.
diabetic.
Yeah.
What makes the difference between a quote-unquote disease and a diabetic?
Well, essentially, there's not a whole lot of difference. People can have diseased kidneys for many reasons, but this is generally what a diabetic kidney will look like. You could still have the same poor function in the kidney, but what happens with the kidney is same thing that happens in the eyes and in the brain, is that the sugar damages all the little blood vessels and all the tubules, and they become very, what's the word I'm looking for, sclerotic, or they develop a lot of scar tissue. And the more scar tissue that organ develops, the less functional it becomes over time. So you're seeing a lot of scar tissue in that organ. So when you look at your blood work, or you know someone who's not doing well in terms of their blood sugar control, this is what the direction they're headed towards. These are adrenal glands. I just wanted to show you how they can change color. So they're not going to have a lot of energy. So one of the things that you have to, I want people to realize too, is that you could still be walking, talking, standing, but you're going to have actual tissue that's diseased or necrotic or dead inside your body, yet you're still functioning. It's amazing what the body can do to get around certain things. But this person right here, how much energy are they going to have? And will they even be able to rehabilitate those adrenal glands? This is a healthy large intestine. This is your IBS intestine. So this is what my intestine used to look like. Very red, raw. Think of like a super long rug burn that goes down your entire body. So that's why people can be so sensitive to foods. That's why raw diet is not really good for this. You would want to do something more like a soothing bone broth, super stew that's been cooked very well, so that you can actually absorb some food and not cause a lot of irritation inside the bowel. This could, of course, lead to further damage, so leaky gut. Has everyone heard of leaky gut? All this inflammation in here, the cells are starting to separate. Once they start to separate, undigested food particles will make it into the bloodstream, and now you've got autoimmune issues. Now you've got super sensitivities to food. That's why some people will notice their diet is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, or they can't figure out one day this food is good and the next day they eat this food and it's bad, and then they eat it another day and it's good. There's no rhyme or reason to why foods are causing problems in their body. It's because the leaky gut, and it just depends on what the body's going to react to that day. So, but you can heal this, going back to your question, but you have to give this time. So one thing when clients come to me, I say, you have to keep in mind that we're going to be months, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18 months to heal something like that. If the kidney, let's go back. is not disease, but it's somewhere between a healthy and a diseased kidney, it's going to take months and months and months to start letting the body carve out that junk and put new tissue in. That's why it's really true when people start to change their diet, they have a healing crisis. Imagine the gunk that would have to be flushed out of that kidney, and you're probably not going to feel so good because your body has never handled that before. These are lungs. I thought I'd put these in here. This is a tobacco lung, so if you know of anyone who smokes, I know this has been shown 100 times, a million times I should say, but people still smoke. This is a healthy lung. This is a lung, this is someone who has emphysema. So this is all dead tissue, but yet that person was alive for a certain period of time with all that dead tissue in their lung. And just getting worse and worse over time. Now, if they had done something at some point in time, even if this had progressed to a certain point, it is possible they could have stopped the damage and even started to do some healing to that dead tissue. It's amazing, again, what the body can do. But at a certain point, it's going to cross the line and you won't be able to do anything. But this person was walking and talking with dead tissue in their body. I'm going to skip that for a second. This one is very important, particularly for women. Has everyone ever seen their thyroid? This is, yep, you know it. This is your thyroid. This is a healthy thyroid right here. And this is a Hashimoto thyroid. So I put this in here particularly because many women are being diagnosed with Hashimoto's. Now, if someone comes and needs to improve their thyroid health and they have Hashimoto's, think of the difference between those two organs. It's going to take a lot of work and time and effort to do something to get this tissue in some kind of shape. This is another type of thyroid issue, inflamed on one side, which people might feel that they're having a closed throat or actually start to pass out because it pushes up against the arteries. But it's going to take some time in healing, and it may have progressed to a point where it actually have to have surgery. So when it comes to thyroid health, diet is the most important thing that you can do because you have to repair this tissue. And this is happening because the body is actually attacking the tissue. So you have to improve the immune system. So this is what your thyroid looks like, a little butterfly. And this is what happens when it gets attacked by the body. And these is, again, particularly for women, but also for men. This is a normal bone. This is your Swiss cheese bone. So does everyone already know that osteoporosis is a disease? It's not just a thing. It's a disease. And what's happening is the bones are rotting from the inside out. Just like a tree that looks really strong, wind blows it over, you go, oh, of course it fell over. There's nothing left in the center. So particularly for women, due to the fact that they don't have as much testosterone as men, they're much more likely as they get older to have that Swiss cheese look. And so osteoporosis is not a calcium deficiency disease. It is a collagen deficiency disease. And so you have to have a place to put your calcium and other minerals. So if your bone is getting thinner and thinner, it doesn't matter how much calcium you eat. You have to actually be able to put it somewhere, the minerals. And so a lot of times what happens is people just eat those calcium and vitamin D, but they won't change their diet. Sugar is guaranteed to cause a Swiss cheese. Processed foods are guaranteed to cause a Swiss cheese. People who take a lot of heartburn medication, you're not going to be digesting your proteins properly. Women are much more likely to have bones that look like this, and men too, who are using heartburn medication on a regular basis or scarfing down Tums. So it's very important that you correct your digestive system first if you want to correct your bones. And that's why it's so important, as I mentioned earlier, to eat healthy in a consistent manner, because you might have 5 things or 3 things that you got to fix to get to the one thing that you really want to fix. And I use the example of the onion. The core is the big problem, but all the layers have been built around it, and you got to push through the layers to finally get to the ultimate problem. And a lot of people in this country, I tell them your onion's actually getting bigger because you keep putting more and more layers on top, and it's going to take longer and longer to get through them. I'm going to skip through that. So type 3 diabetes, has everyone heard of that before? Alzheimer's is being discussed as a form of diabetes and dementia, because what does diabetes do? It damages the blood vessels. What's your brain full of? Blood vessels. So you can actually physically cause a change due to eating the way that you would eat to create diabetes, you can cause a physical change inside the brain. So that's why it's imperative that people realize that the foods they eat it may take 30 or 40 or 50 years, but eventually you might increase your chance of being that person that has no memory and has to be cared for. And one of the things when I talk to clients is you have to do this so that you can do everything possible so that you don't cause other people time and money later in life because you didn't want to change your diet. I put this here just so that everyone could see I wasn't making that up about type 3 diabetes. This is actually in the medical journals. So they conclude that the term type 3 diabetes actually reflects the fact that AD represents a form of diabetes that selectively involves the brain and has molecular and biochemical features that overlap type 1 diabetes. So it's very interesting, and type 2. So how many people do you know are doing this? How many people have done it themselves or might still be doing this? Is eating yourselves into an early grave. And so my job is to get people who want to understand, one, that's what you're doing. And if you don't change your eating habits, you're most likely going to die earlier and with a greater level of sickness than if you do change your diet. I thought Will Rogers is a genius. When you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. But many people won't do that because of this. How many people have excuses or hear excuses as to why not to change their diet? So I left this blank here so you could think of those excuses. Does anyone have a favorite that maybe you say or you know someone else says?
I don't have time to eat healthy.
Yeah, that's a big one. I don't have time to eat healthy. How about another one?
It costs more to eat healthy.
It costs more to eat healthy.
After the holidays.
That's a great one. And there's always a holiday. After the holidays, after the wedding, after this event. Next, I'm going to do it 2018, January 1st. Life is going to change. Those are big ones. But as you saw, eating unhealthy will actually cause you more money in the long run. Medical reasons are medical bankruptcy is the biggest personal bankruptcy in this country. So talk about what's expensive. Eating unhealthy, not having time. As I tell clients, eventually your body's going to force you to make time, and it's not going to be on your terms. It's going to be on the disease's terms. And when you're in that position, you're really not in a good spot. And a lot of times too, what's another one? Has anyone heard that it's hogwash? What you eat doesn't matter. I hear that sometimes. If it was true, then why do they allow sugar to be in food? If it were true, why do they allow us to sell those things? Does anyone have a guess as to why that food is still allowed to be sold?
Market purposes.
Yeah, market, it's all big business. The pyramid, as everyone knows, was actually developed by special interest groups and lawyers and Congress. It had very little input from those who knew what happens in the body. So a great book to read on that is the book called Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes. It's called Good Calories, Bad Calories. And it's by Gary Taubes. And it has all the documented evidence in there. So he has all the research papers and everything you would want to know as to is this true or not true. And all this bad eating habits really took a big plunge in the 60s and 70s when big sugar and so forth actually won out over eating healthy. So one of the things I have here is supplements. I do use supplements in my office, but one thing I wanted to point out is if you don't make a real consistent change in your diet, don't take too much, don't expect too much. So how many people have done this or know people who will have their supplements but continue to eat pretty much the same? There's no point. It's useless. You're throwing your money away. I would rather you just eat the junky food and not do the supplements, because most of the supplements are actually given to Big Pharma. You would have to know which supplements to get, like Garden Life is generally a good supplement. But if you want to actually make the supplements work, you have to change your diet. If you don't change your diet, you're not going to get too much results. In fact, the food always wins out over the supplements in the long run. I have clients who will come in who are doing really well. They're taking the supplements and then they fall off the wagon, and some of their symptoms start coming back even though they're taking their supplements because their eating habits have reverted back to the old ways. Okay. I'm going to skip this for a second. Actually, real quickly, for what I do is you saw those organs and tissues, the kidneys, the lungs, the heart, so forth. When I work with clients, I change their diet to eat in a specific way that's for their most compromised organs. But I also do what's called very specific feeding of the organs and tissues. So I want to get the best result, the quickest way, so that the person can start feeling better. If that person has compromised kidneys or heart, I don't want just a basic supplement. I want something that's going to go in there and actually have the cellular material to feed that heart or that kidney. So it is possible. And your point, Greg, you can do this. You can take a sick kidney, you can take a sick liver, you can take a sick pancreas, and you can get it to a certain degree to a much healthier state. A lot depends on how long you've been eating a certain way, how much damage you've created inside your body. And so everyone would need to own up to the fact that many of their health issues are self-inflicted. And once you realize that it's your fault, for the most part, then you realize, well, then if I did this in a negative way, I can reverse the process and improve my health and have a smiling pancreas and a smiling kidney and a smiling liver. So if you were to go shopping, if your organs were to go shopping, where would they shop? Would they go down the aisle with the Chips Ahoy cookies and the Oreos? You might want them to. Some people, I used to love Oreo cookies. Your organs would go to the real food. They would go to the whole food, the real unprocessed meats, the organic vegetables, the bone broth, things like that. The taste buds, excuse me, the taste buds, the pleasure center, and our memories of foods that we used to like and have as part of family will take us down those other aisles. So you can break that disconnect so that when you do go shopping, you won't say, well, I'll eat healthy today, but tomorrow I'm going to give myself, I'm going to go get these cookies and all these things, and I'm going to take them home, but I won't eat too much. And next thing you know, they're all gone. Okay. I'm going to skip through that. So one of the things that people can do when they change their diet is they can get off their blood pressure medications. They can get off their psychiatric drugs. And this, I recommend that you do work with your doctor when it comes to that. How can a person feel good if their brain is a mess because of the food they're eating? If their blood sugar is doing this all day and their brain's not getting fed, they're not going to think properly. If you can change their diet and feed their brain and feed their adrenals and get their blood sugar even, they might not actually be anxious anymore. They might actually be depressed anymore, or to a point where they don't need the medications. You can get off your heartburn medications. You can stop taking statins, which essentially, unless there's a very specific issue, you don't really need. Drastically improve your blood work, reduce thyroid or eliminate thyroid medication. And a lot of times it's not the thyroid that needs the help, it's another organ that needs the help, and then the thyroid will start functioning better. You can reduce or eliminate arthritic conditions. Just because you have arthritis doesn't mean that's it, you're stuck with it. The body can heal. You can reduce digestive inflammation. You can reduce or eliminate skin issues like eczema and psoriasis. You can actually make sure that if you do have cancer and you change your diet and you're very specific about what you eat, that you are able to get through things like chemo and radiation in a much stronger state than if you just ate whatever you felt like eating. And just to be healthy overall, what I call get that dimmer switch going in the right direction. Okay, sometimes it doesn't catch you until your 40s or 50s, and you look back and go, ooh, I was good up until 42, or I was good up until 50, and then all of a sudden the wheels started coming off. That's because the dimmer switch finally turned dark enough that you noticed it, and that's the moment when you have to make a change, because if you keep waiting, it's going to be harder and harder to reverse the process. Anyone surprised there's not a magic pill? Okay. How many people, everyone would like that magic pill. And that's one thing everyone has to understand is you have to work for it. And the only way to truly work for it is to be consistent. And most people are going to start down here. And that's okay. As long as you know what to do and you keep working at it, you will get to the top. And one of the best things that a client told to me, and I thought this was great, is that he liked the saying, take control of your health before your health takes control of you. And how many people know others whose health is now ruling their lives rather than the reverse? And so you have a choice. Now, which one do you want to choose? The beat says probably the green one, but how many people do you know won't choose or just keep hitting the red X over and over and over again and then wonder why they're not doing very well? So the bottom line is put yourself in control. You're going to have to work for it. It might not be easy, but if you are consistent and you know why things are happening in your body and you don't become beholden to just one type of diet and you can be flexible, you can do a lot of healing in the body. It's amazing what the body can do when it actually has a full range of nutrients and the bank account is much higher. It's amazing how a person can heal. And the thing is, people will get younger as they get older. The biggest things that clients tell me is, I now have more energy. I changed my diet. Now I can get down on the floor with my kids because my arthritis is not so bad. People look at me and go, what happened? You look healthy. They don't say you look good. They say you look healthy because their eyes are gleaming, their hair looks good, their skin is healthy. Bad skin, bad hair, bad nails are a key indicator that you have a lot of nutritional deficiencies. Fill them up and the body says, okay, here's some extra. And then you have good hair, good eyes, good skin, things like that. So does anyone have any questions? I think I'm almost out of time. Any questions? You sure? Okay, this is, so what I'd like to do then is, first of all, did everyone get some of the information they thought they would like to get? Good. So when you go home, this is why whole health nutrition exists. We want to make super people in terms of health. So think of yourself as Superwoman, Superman. They don't get that way just by eating junk, which is kryptonite. They get that way by eating real food on a regular basis. And if you know of anyone who's not doing well, point them in the right direction, either to someone who does what I do or to me, or maybe you can change their eating habits. If there's not too many dynamics in the family that cause people to come to loggerheads, you might have to send them to somebody to actually get them to change their ways. But with that, I'd like to thank everybody for their time. Hopefully you learned a couple of things. And if you have more questions, I'll be around. And you can always email or call the Whole Health Nutrition Center. So thank you.
And from CoreLife, thank you very much for coming in. If you guys haven't eaten, by all means, enjoy your meal. Thank you.
Because that food will actually build